I'm here today with my friend and fellow church member, Matt Harr. Many of you know Matt. He grew up in our church. His parents and grandparents are members with us. His wife, Julie, grew up in our church. Her parents are members too. For the last few years, Matt served as our leadership board chair. Matt, these are interesting times in the life of our church.
You are right about that. None of us expected it, but I'm proud to say that we have been taking every opportunity to be a church together in the midst of this season of sheltering in place.
Matt, the leadership board was the group that had responsibility for deciding to put our in-person worship on hold for this season. I know that you and the board have been monitoring the situation, praying some more, and have been seeking to discern the best ways for us to begin to re-engage in our church building and in-person worship. Can you give us a summary of what the leadership board is thinking?
Sure, thanks. But first, let me say that our number one priority is to be the church of Jesus Christ in this time and place. And critical to that is keeping people safe. What is it we say? We want everyone to be safe, welcome, and wanted here. Safety must be a priority, and it certainly is for us. I also want to say that in terms of a plan, things are fast shifting, and we'll do our best to communicate to everyone. We ask patience, understanding, and maybe a little forgiveness, since none of us have ever done this before. We know that no matter what we do, there will be people who think it's way too soon and others who think it's way past time.
Matt, what are some factors and criteria that the leadership board is using to make your decision?
It's a good question. We've certainly been listening to what our politicians are saying, but even more, we're paying attention to the scientists at the CDC and their directions. Our bishop has also given his advice and has asked us to follow the most restrictive limitation.
It is important that we use our best and collective wisdom. But what we all want to know is, how do we go from here?
Yeah, that's another good question. We know that there are some people who just want to go back immediately to how things were at the first of the year. But we think that it's best that we return gradually, cautiously, and in stages. The last thing we want is for our church to move too soon and possibly become a hotspot for spreading the virus. For now, we'll start with the reopening of our First Kids Learning Center on May 18th. They'll enter through a separate door, have daily temperature checks, and stringently follow our state's guidelines. We want to wait longer, perhaps later this summer, before we move to reopening the building for weddings, funerals, and other small groups. The big question we're wrestling with is how and when we move toward in-person worship. And that's not been determined at this time. We do know that a big challenge will be how we do so while maintaining the 6-foot distance required by our governor's social distancing mandate for groups that are meeting. We may want to start with fewer worship services, and we may need to keep people spread out in order to honor the CDC's recommendation on limiting ourselves to 25% occupancy. We also expect that when we return for in-person worship, there may be a limit to our abilities to have live music, congregational singing, and our choir. For now, the leadership board is moving cautiously and strategically, and we promise to communicate as we move through the various phases of our re-engaging in the building and eventually toward in-person worship.
Thanks, Matt. I think I understand. What I heard you to say was that First Kids is opening up starting on May 18th. We're going to wait longer for weddings, funerals, and small groups, maybe later this summer. And that we haven't decided at this time about when we'll start back for in-person worship, but that will come only after we move through a gradual reopening of the building. And when we do meet back for in-person worship, it won't look the same. Music, especially, will need to look differently. Matt, I wonder if what we're being called to do in this time is not to return to the past, but to a new future. You know, patience has never really been my best virtue. I want the future now. But I am willing to trust in the wisdom of our leadership board. And more importantly, I want to trust that God is working among us even now to lead us to a bigger and better future together. Thank you and the leadership board for what can't be an easy time of making decisions.
And I want to thank you too, Bart, and the staff for all that you've done during this time to lead us in being a church. The online worship keeps getting better each week. The daily devotionals have been engaging, and I know that a lot of people have been making a lot of calls to keep us connected to each other. In the midst of it all, we've managed to collect food for Fish and our backpack ministry. We started an online prayer ministry, and I even heard something about a new online Bible study. So thank you again. I look forward to all the ways that we can continue to grow and be a church together.
I do too, Matt. I really miss everyone, but I look forward to any way that we can be connected. Thank you, everyone.